Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to unpack some really complex topics, pull out the surprising stuff, and today, wow, we're plunging into something pretty profound, the fabric of our financial reality, hidden forces, and maybe even a big role for a certain precious metal.
Yeah, the material you shared is fascinating. It connects things like Overwoo Devolution, our money system, even the woo behind silver, as they call it.
Exactly. So our mission today is connect those dots, figure out what's really important, and maybe help you understand why they're saying this time is different, hopefully in a way that sticks.
Absolutely. It seems these sources are arguing that finance has been a major tool for control, and maybe we're at a point where that's becoming, well, undeniable.
Okay, let's get into that. This idea of reality itself being overwhelming suppression. What exactly is overwoo? The sources say it's organic.
Right. Overwoo, as they describe it, is like suppressed truths just naturally coming to the surface, like a tide revealing what was hidden. It's not planned, it just happens. Reality asserting itself.
Okay, an organic process. And then how does devolution fit in? That sounds more designed.
It is, according to the sources. They say devolution is a framework set up by continuity of government planners.
Planners. Okay.
Yeah. And its purpose, they claim, is to kind of navigate this overwoo period, a structured way to shift power downwards, away from the top, and expose these bad actors they talk about.
So overwoo is the natural tide, devolution is like the engineered current helping it along.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
Celebrating the exposure.
Now, tied into this devolution idea, the sources talk about something called the self-organizing collective, the SOC. This sounds really interesting.
It does. The material suggests this group started coming together back in the 70s, sort of loosely organized around 73, 74.
And why then? What was the trigger?
Well, the sources link it directly to Nixon taking the U.S. off the gold standard in 1971. That seems to be the catalyst.
Okay.
And since then, this SOC has apparently been growing, planning this long-term strategy to, as they put it, upend the capture of humanity by this particular mindset.
The bug. That's the placeholder they use, right, for this controlling mindset.
Yeah, the bug. And the SOC's mission is basically to undo that capture.
So how big is this group? And what's their game plan now?
Well, the material suggests it's huge. International, millions of people involved globally, apparently, including military elements, but intensely focused in the U.S.
Millions. Wow.
Yeah. And their plan now, as described, is to become more visible, use their own emergence as a kind of shock element, to wake more people up.
A shock element.
Right. The sources suggest we're really close to a tipping point, a critical mass for them to act more openly. They even compare it to the American Revolution.
How so?
They say only about 3% commitment was needed then to kick things off.
Mm.
And the SOC thinks we're near that kind of percentage now for more overt action.
Okay, so what does that overt action look like? What's the core strategy?
It's interesting. They say the goal isn't for the SOC to just jump out first.
Yeah.
It's more about prompting the quote-unquote deep state to expose itself more.
So they kind of draw them out?
Exactly. Strategic encouragement for actions to reveal them. Then, at some point, the SOC can just sort of naturally say, see, it's us they're attacking, and gain that wider recognition.
And this ties into things like state audits, Arizona, Georgia.
Yeah, the sources claim this strategy runs parallel to those revelations. When those audits supposedly show illegitimacy, the idea spreads, trust erodes.
Which leads to?
A run on precious metals, they predict. People losing faith in the system, wanting something tangible, metals coming out of every channel into people's pockets. Yeah. A natural reaction, they argue.
Okay, let's pivot a bit. To understand the scale of this potential change, we need to understand the financial system itself, its history, Bretton Woods.
Right. Post-WWII, the deal was the U.S. dollar was fixed to gold, $35 an ounce. Most other currencies then pegged to the dollar. A gold-backed system, essentially.
But the sources claim the U.S. didn't stick to the deal.
Yeah, they say the U.S. started printing way more dollars than it had gold backing, kind of reneging on the contract.
Which led to a poker game.
That's the term they use. France especially started calling the bluff, demanding golds for their dollars. Britain, too, put the pressure on.
Forcing Nixon's hand in '71.
Exactly. Nixon closes the gold window. Officially, it was temporary, blamed on speculators. But here we are, 50-plus years later.
So no gold backing. How did they maintain monetary power then? That's where the petrodollar comes in, right?
Precisely. The sources talk about this Anglo-American alliance. London, Zurich, New York wanting to keep control.
The money power triad.
Right. And the story goes, Kissinger goes to Nixon with a plan. Saudi Arabia wasn't keen on paper dollars for oil. They wanted gold.
Makes sense.
So the deal, according to the sources, was U.S. protection for Saudi Arabia in exchange for them accepting paper dollars for oil.
Okay, but the key part.
The key part was mandating that the whole world had to use U.S. dollars to buy oil. That effectively pegged the world to the dollar, not gold. Kept the power structure intact.
And they clamped down hard on anyone who challenged it, like Gaddafi trying a gold dinar.
And the sources certainly claim that leaders who tried to move away from the petrodollar faced severe punishment. Yeah.
And now, fast forward to today, we're seeing things like Russia and Saudi Arabia making deals that seem to question the petrodollar. Is this the unraveling the sources predict?
It seems to fit their narrative.
Right.
They suggest this is where natural law, the truth, starts really surfacing. We reach a point where, quote, everyone will see it for what it is.
And this connects to Extra's pyramid. What's that?
It's a concept from the sources visualizing the financial system. Basically, the physical paper dollar, even unbacked, stays desirable until trust is totally gone.
The tipping point.
Right. Once enough people realize the reality, as the sources see it, that trust collapses, and then you get that massive run to gold, to physical assets.
Even if only a small percentage are awake now.
Yeah, they argue that 3% can multiply fast. Once the run starts, they predict there just won't be enough physical metal for everyone scrambling out of fiat.
Okay, that's a dramatic scenario. But why is this time different? We've had crises before. The deep state, as the sources call them, always seem to manage to kick the can down the road. Why not now?
That's a key question the material addresses. Their argument is, in the past, the quote-unquote deep state controlled the key levers. Media, political structures, the military. They controlled the narrative.
And that control allowed them to delay things.
Exactly. But now the sources claim those very levers are failing. Mainstream TV viewership is down, the narrative battle on social media isn't going their way, political structures globally seem illegitimate to more people, especially in the West.
Their grip is weakening.
That's the idea. The old tools aren't working like they used to.
Which brings us to this Treaty of Westphalia moment comparison the sources make. What's the parallel they're drawing?
Okay, so they point to 1699, Treaty of Westphalia. European kings basically made a pact to stop private armies threatening their power, especially after a silver crisis. The contrast today, they argue, is that anyone can effectively raise an army on social media, challenge the power elite directly without needing traditional resources.
So the information space is the new battleground, and it's harder to control.
Fundamentally harder. They suggest this means traditional media is failing, it's being assaulted from so many levels. And once that perceived last linchpin of control goes,
people see things more clearly.
That's the prediction. The alleged crimes and perpetrators become undeniable, leading to real action.
What kind of action? How do they see this upheaval playing out?
Well, they predict a really rapid change. There's talk of local arrests of these alleged D-state players, a swift shift in the social order.
Wow, local arrests.
Yeah. And beyond that, they forecast the start of a new form of cultural revolution. Something global, maybe even dissolving national borders eventually.
Dissolving borders, that's huge.
It is. The stated goal is to build back without them, going back maybe 400, even 6,000 years, to find a, quote, first point of solidity for how humans should organize.
And new money.
Within 3 years, they predict. A constitutional or some other form of U.S. Treasury-created coinage, bimetallic, gold and silver-based, accepted globally. And silver, they think, could even overtake gold.
Okay, silver potentially overtaking gold. Let's dive into that silver revolution. The sources mention these old Webbit data reports predicting $600 silver way back. What was Webbit?
Right, Webbit. The sources describe it as a linguistic analysis system. Think of it like an early AI, scanning huge amounts of online text, not just numbers, looking for patterns to predict future trends, sort of like a collective subconscious tracker.
And it picked up on silver.
Yeah, back in '97, apparently it found this weird link between silver and the sun, which was odd. Usually silver's the moon, right?
Right.
By 2003, after they refined it to focus on context, not just digits, the data kept showing silver's numerical sensitivity. The $600 figure popped up around 2000, kept getting reinforced.
And linked to Bitcoin later, before Bitcoin was even really a thing.
Apparently, yeah. Linked to specific Bitcoin price points, 64K, $100K parties. And this idea of people finding intergenerational wealth in their old silver.
And then the really interesting part
is that the $600 figure kind of lines up if you take the 1980 silver peak of $50 and adjust it for inflation using the old CPI method before they changed how it was calculated.
That is interesting. Okay, what about the gold-silver ratio? The sources say it's way out of whack historically.
Yeah, they argue the natural ratio for like 4,000 years was maybe 10.1, never really above 20.1. Silver was valued much higher relative to gold when both were money.
So what happened? Bankers pulled a fast one in 1873.
That's the narrative in the sources. Shifted to a gold-only standard. Why? Because the bankers held the gold in vaults. Silver was the people's money merchants, miners, farmers. It circulated.
So removing silver was about control.
Exactly. Taking power away from the general populace. The sources even use the Wizard of Oz as an allegory.
How does that fit?
Dorothy's silver slippers in the book, not ruby like the movie, representing the common person, the working class, being crucified on a cross of gold by the banks. It's quite a metaphor.
It is. So where do they see the ratio going now? It's like 70.1 currently.
They predict a massive correction back down to 16.1, 10.1, maybe even 5.1. They don't even rule out parity 1.1.
Wow. Okay, let's look at the fundamentals. Supply and demand. Does that back up such a dramatic shift for silver?
Well, the sources lay out a compelling case. First, mining supply.
Yeah.
It's been flat or slightly decreasing for years. No huge new discoveries coming online.
Okay, supply is tight. What about demand? Industrial demand.
Growing fast. 20 years ago, it was about 35% of total demand. Last year, it was 55% of a larger pie, 55% of 850 million ounces mined versus 35% of 550 million back then.
And it's projected to grow even more.
Yeah, driven by electronics, EVs, solar panels, all that tech. The sources suggest industrial demand alone could hit 80% of mine supply within 10 years.
Leaving not much for investment.
Exactly. And investment demand, which used to be pretty small, maybe 10%, sometimes spiking to 50%, actually hit over 50% of the market in 2020. Huge numbers.
530 million ounces in 2020 between institutional and retail.
That's what the sources state. 320 million institutional, 200 million retail. If that kind of demand continues or grows as trust falls.
You get that sucking sound.
That's the phrase they use. Metals just vanishing from the market into private hands, making the Hunt brothers attempt back in the 80s look like a small parade.
And what about these supposed hidden hoards of gold and silver? Grand Canyon, Alaska beaches. Are they real, according to the sources?
The sources claim they are. Vast amounts. But they argue mining is restricted. Why? Because realers don't want people to be truly free with their own sound money.
So access might change with new tech like crypto.
That's the idea. Gold and silver-backed cryptos could make it easier to maybe bypass hefty VA taxes like in Europe or Japan.
And the potential upside is huge because silver is such a tiny part of the financial system now.
Incredibly tiny. The sources state silver represents just 0.02% of all fiat financial assets. 0.02%. The room for growth, if it remonetizes even partially, is just staggering.
Okay, beyond the economics, the sources get into some really out there ideas, the woo of silver. How does this fit with the Space Force and the sci-fi world they predict?
Right, it gets pretty wild. They position the U.S. Space Force as sort of the first visible product of this SOC, the tip of the iceberg emerging.
Okay.
And as these big crises hit, they claim fundamental changes will push us into this sci-fi world. Flying cars, that kind of stuff becomes possible once the alleged blinders and restraints of the deep state are gone.
And silver's role in this,
It connects back to human biology, oddly enough. There's an anecdote in the material about a silver smelter.
the MRI scan.
Yeah, holding silver supposedly lit up his 10th cranial nerve on an MRI. The theory proposed is that this nerve connects us to time itself.
Making silver a time-sensitive metal, that induces a response in humans.
That's the speculative leap the sources make. It's definitely in the woo category, but it's part of the narrative they present about silver's unique properties.
Okay, let's talk about the corn harvest. That's another provocative term from the sources. What does that mean?
Corn harvest. They use it to describe the predicted exposure and removal of people they label farm products.
Farm products, meaning
Alleged deep state agents, basically. Some sources even claim specific training by intelligence agencies like the CIA, or ties to foreign powers like China for figures like Obama or some BLM leaders. It's a very strong claim.
And the effect of this harvest.
A massive crisis of confidence for the average person, the normie world, as they put it. Seeing people they trusted exposed like this would shake the foundations, create huge uncertainty.
Driving people
into metals, they predict, a flight to safety. And in this new landscape, they also see a role for specific people, like Reggie Middleton. Because of his expertise in decentralized finance, DeFi, the prediction is A new U.S. government will need him to figure out how to properly tie cryptocurrencies to physical gold and silver.
Interesting. So, looking at all this, potential chaos, upheaval, but also potential freedom.
Yeah.
How do the sources suggest people shift from fear to empowerment? How do you thrive in this?
Well, fundamentally, they frame it as liberation. Freedom from what they call a 6,000-year-old death cult that fostered misery and debt.
That's quite a statement.
It is. Philosophically, they push for a shift from focusing on having things to focusing on being.
Yeah.
True security isn't just assets. It's self-knowledge, relationships, skills, ingenuity, how to survive, how to collaborate.
So it's about inner resources and community.
Very much so. And they believe this period will forge a new greatest generation, globally. People who might seem complacent now, numbnuts and ignorant kids, as one source puts it quite bluntly.
Ouch.
Yeah, but they'll be, quote, bitch slap by reality into growing up fast. Rebuilding civilization without the old baggage.
Operating with constraints off humanity.
That's the vision. The idea that if you add value to the universe rewards you. This new generation will operate differently, freed from those alleged ancient constraints.
And practically, what should people do now?
Get in fighting shape, they advise. Prepare your body, your mind. They even mention simple things like maximizing sleep to boost natural human growth hormone for repair and resilience. Be ready for intense times.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, standing on what the sources describe as a precipice, the question for you, the listener, is, what does it mean to not just get through this, but to thrive? If fundamental truths are being re-revealed, how might you contribute to building something better without those old constraints? How do you step into that potential sci-fi world for humanity? Lots to think about.
Definitely. Keep exploring these ideas. Because the universe, its marvels and mysteries, they seem to extend far beyond what our five senses usually tell us.